you think about the medicines like Januvia or Onglyza and their DPP-4 inhibitors, they're really, I call them GLP-1 based therapy. They're not really incretins. They have a role in how that's metabolized. But basically, they prevent degradation of native or endogenous GLP-1 that the patient makes, okay? The two options are sitagliptin and saxagliptin, or Januvia and Onglyza. Now, advantages, they're well tolerated and they're pills. That's nice. They don't have really side effects, clean in that regard. Disadvantages, they cost quite a bit. The amount of glycemic reduction that you get from them is not nearly as good as what you would get from metformin or insulin or a GLP-1 based analog. You get about 0.7% is what you get. So, when you're comparing a medicine that costs $100 a month, and I'm using that's a very loose term, you might be a little bit more, a little bit less, I'm not sure what one of those costs, with a medicine that costs $4 a month, like a metformin, and you would see why it's not first-line therapy for most patients. And there's no long-term studies either. So, what will pan out with these? We don't know. They may have favorable side effects, or not side effects. They may have favorable outcomes, more favorable, but they may not too. And so we really just don't know yet. They're still so new to the market. But the biggest thing in my mind with them is that the bang for your buck with these is kind of low. You get your A1C reduction of 0.7%, which is not usually enough for people who are failing two agents already. So here's kind of a summary. Yes, ma'am. I've asked that question, and it's generally not recommended. It doesn't have much effect, just because whenever you give somebody a dose of a GLP-1 analog, Byetta or Victoza, you're giving such a massive influx of that already, you're overloading it to start with. And so adding in a DPP-4 inhibitor to that to slow the degradation of that doesn't have much additional effect with that. So the benefits, the pros, well, and these are whether you're talking about the GLP-1 analogs or a DPP-4 inhibitor. They preserve beta cell function. They don't cause any weight gain, which is nice when you compare them to TZDs or insulin or sulfonylurea. They don't cause hypoglycemia unless they're taken with insulin or with a sulfonylurea. They do help with postprandial glucose control. Cons, now this is where they're expensive, okay? And the Byettas and the Victozas, you're going to spend, depending on how the patient's prescription coverage is, but probably at least $100 a month, depending on, maybe a lot more than that too. Anybody have any anecdotal stories about how much they cost? Okay, so that's a lot of money. I mean, these people aren't on one drug either. These people are on blood pressure medicine, cholesterol medicine. Who knows if they're on something for their mood, and you think, well, oh yeah, we're just going to add one drug. Well, how much is it? 200. You're like, what? $200 a month? So yeah, that's a big deal. Okay. Main side effects, and this is not so much with the DPP-4s, but with Byetta and Victoza, is the nausea. There is some case reports about pancreatitis happening with the GLP-1 analogs, and it's not common by any means, but there are case reports of that. Also with Victoza, there is a black box warning about certain thyroid tumors that seem to have happened in lab rats but not been seen in humans. The FDA wanted to put that on their marketing, so take that for what it's worth too. So again, there's just no long-term studies with them either. So, all things considered, I think the GLP-1 analogs are they have a lot of benefits, weight loss and good glycemic reduction, but at the huge cost of expense mainly. That's just the big thing. When you think about healthcare dollars being stretched thin, how do you add that in a way that makes sense for the patient as well as for all of us? So just some key points in summary about these. the maximal benefits of metformin are at 2,000 milligrams a day or a gram twice a day. If you are using TZDs, they should be started at low doses and increased slowly to minimize side effects. The glucose-lowering dosages of sulfonylureas plateau at about half the recommended maximum dose. And this is kind of a summary of how I would approach a newly diagnosed diabetic. Oh. Okay. So they're gonna do lifestyle changes, and they're gonna also be started on medication at the outset. So if somebody's diagnosed with diabetes, I'm gonna start them on metformin, and this is type 2 diabetes, I'm gonna start them on metformin while I'm also doing nutritional therapy and diet and exercise. And it depends where they are. If I diagnose them and their A1C is 10, then I'm not just gonna start them on metformin, okay? If you diagnose somebody and their A1C is 7.1, and then I'll just start them on metformin in addition to that. And then you check them every 3 months until you're seeing that they're meeting appropriate targets, or until if they're not. And at that point, then you have to decide, should I raise dosages? Should I add therapies? Or finally, kind of the end of the line is either put them on insulin or consider a GLP-1 analog, I think. The thing I hope that you've learned from these slides is how much A1C reduction you're going to get. So you know now that if you start somebody on metformin, you're going to get 1 to 2 percentage points. So if they're starting off with an A1C of 9, not going to get there, okay? If they got an A1C of 9, they need to be at least on 2 medicines from the outset. Maybe even consider metformin plus insulin at the outset. Maybe they've got some glucose toxicity, and you might be able to help give their pancreas a break so they can start making their own insulin again. So know where you're starting, know how far you've got to go to get them to where they need to go. And also think about it in big terms as far as blood pressure and hyperlipidemia play huge roles as well. So I saw a hand, yes?
So if you get someone who comes in with like an A1C of 12 or 13, I in the past would skip insulin versus going through oral medications trials for a year. Is there any like science behind that?
Besides going straight to insulin?
Yeah.
I would go straight to insulin too. I guess the question would be, would you do anything in addition to just going straight to insulin? I had a guy recently that came in with polyuria, polydipsia. He's young. He's like a 32-year-old African-American guy that came in. He had an A1C of like 10.6. He had triglycerides of like 800, HDL of like 20, you know, and random blood sugars of 300. And I started him on, you see triglycerides that are that high and HDLs that are that low, you know, there's huge insulin resistance. And so I put him on both metformin, a TZD, and an insulin all at the same time. And his fastings are now about 100 after about a month or two. And, but, you know, because he was clearly catabolic, but seeing that degree of insulin resistance with somebody like that made me, and I don't know, you could make an argument, well, that was too much. Maybe you should just start him on metformin plus insulin. But I think certainly needs insulin. Metformin, you can make a great argument for, you know, maybe you need another pill too. So.
So if you've gotten a maximized on glucoside and metformin, you can just add the insulin without necessarily adjusting the doses of the glucoside and metformin.
We're going to talk about that in our next. We're going to talk about what to do with orals when the next session. I think are we due for a break? 3 minutes. All right, we're going to talk about what to do with pills once insulin is started, and that's going to be in the next section.